Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there to the very end of our SAEM Education Summit. I am Matt Stull. I'm one of the program committee members, and so excited to be here today. We've curated a panel of, true just educational powerhouses, leaders in emergency medicine this afternoon. The idea was, as sort of the day winds down, take away the formality of slides and things like that, and really just sort of hear some stories, hear how they got to where they are today, and get a sense of what advice they have for us, whether we be aspiring educators or academicians, whatever we all may be working on. I want it to be a little bit loose, so if you have questions, just let us know. We'll repeat them. But to get started, I'd like each of the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, tell us who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing right now.
I think this is on. So thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be up here with these two amazing mentors to me. My name is Lanie Yarris. I'm one of the education faculty at Oregon Health and Science University. I serve as program director, education fellowship director, and section chief for education. And one of the other hats I wear is in the editorial world. So I'm deputy editor for the Journal of Graduate Medical Education and decision editor for Academic Emergency Medicine and AEM-ENT. So we're starting with not path yet. Okay.
So hi everyone, I'm Mike Gisondi. I'm the Vice Chair of Education at Stanford University. I just passed my 2-year mark and returning back home to the farm. I trained there many years ago and returned in 2017. The 14 years in between, I was in Chicago. I was the program director in emergency medicine there, as well as the medical education scholarship fellowship director and the director of the Academy of Medical Educators for Feinberg.
Afternoon, I'm Cheryl Herron. I am currently the Vice Chair for Administrative Affairs at Emory. In my former life, I was an Associate Residency Director with my friends here to the right. I do have the distinction of also being an Assistant Dean for Clinical Education in the School of Medicine. So I cross the gamut of UME and GME, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Excuse me. I think the first thing that I was really interested in is just a little bit about history and pathway and how you sort of created a career in medical education to the point of, being seen as a leader, a professor-level educator. How did that come about? Where did that interest even come from?
For me, it started during residency, but I definitely didn't start out thinking that I wanted to get where I am now. I was interested, I loved being a clinical emergency physician, but also was really interested in education. And as I was graduating residency, I had this idea that I was interested in going into academics, but if I went into academics, I really wanted to be an expert. And I saw in my department people who had done fellowships and had had training who were really recognized for their expertise, and the things that they spent their time doing were part of their job description and felt valued. And then I saw the educators, and I felt like the educators tended to be people who were more junior, who were thrown into roles and who juggled a lot of responsibilities. And that actually gave me hesitation about entering academics. And so I went to my chair at the time, Jairus Hedges, who is one of my mentors and one of the founders, I think, of academic emergency medicine. And I kind of explained my conundrum and said, I want to do something like what our researchers do, where they do a fellowship and then they enter their academic career set up for success. And he's like, well, let's do that. Why don't we do that? So he helped me develop an education fellowship, and I developed that fellowship with his support and many other mentors with the idea that I wanted to invest and develop a career that would set me up for success as an educator. And I really feel like the opportunities I was given during that 2-year fellowship continued to unfold in many ways over the 12 years that have passed since then. So I did a 2-year education fellowship, joined the faculty, became residency director in 2012, and have had the opportunity to be involved in medical education scholarship and publishing, and it's been very rewarding.
So it's an interesting story because I have a similar path where this light bulb went off sometime during residency, and for me it was the middle of 2nd year of residency. I chatted with my program director at the time, Rebecca Smith-Coggins, who's now our Associate Dean for Student Wellness at Stanford. I said, I really want to do medical education. And she said, okay, well, that sounds great. And I said, well, how do I get training in that? And she paused. I remember exactly where we were standing in the emergency department when it stopped. And she's like, well, you don't really get training in that. Like, you don't. So no one was getting master's degrees. No one was going to fellowship then. And she's really sweet, and she helped try to identify a path for me. And just a couple months later, we came to SAEM, actually. And Glenn Hamilton at Wright State had just opened a faculty development fellowship there. He had it open for just a couple of years. But they had a booth in the Innovations and Emergency Medicine Education exhibit. And I basically decided, well, I'm not moving to Ohio, but I really like this idea. Sorry, Ohio, I just wasn't moving to Ohio. And I love my friends from Ohio. And we just replicated it at Stanford with the help of the then internal medicine program director, Kelly Scaff, who's a bigwig in medical education. He's an MD, PhD. And he was really thoughtful in helping design some of the experiential learning for what was a one-year fellowship. And if I could go back and redo it, I would have been with a 2-year program and a master's degree and some more formal training, because I spent most of my junior faculty years at Northwestern going to junior faculty development seminars and trainings and trying to get some of the education research methodology chops that I felt like I didn't get out of fellowship. But I got a lot of really great experiential learning in fellowship, and it set me on a really bright course. And I think for anyone in the room who's mentoring trainees and who are really on the fence about fellowship, send them to fellowship, give them the time and the break and the space to think about their careers deeply and to carve time for special training. I wrote a lot as an APD, and then I became a PD, and for me, PD was an administrative role, and it sort of held up my career a little bit in terms of education research, and I'm so happy to be in a new role, just doing different work, working with you and me through the gamut through faculty development once again, inclusive of residency and many fellowships at our program. I'm working with a nice team at Stanford who enjoy doing education research. We've started collaborating with folks who are non-MDs, PhDs in various social sciences to be able to do some nice education research. We have one in our department now who we're opening an education research lab next week. It launches next week. I'm very excited about the Pearl, is what it's called, coming to a conference near you. But I've watched sort of my effort and my professional identity kind of move around over the course of what's been 17 years since leaving residency, and it's interesting. It's an interesting journey.
So mine is a bit different in the sense that while I loved education, it wasn't what I was drawn to. My life was around, looking at equity and inclusion and diversity and how does our environment, right, really impact the work that we do. And so my work really started as I was an injury control fellow initially at Emory, and shortly thereafter our ARD and PD transitioned, and I literally was just placed in that role only because I had a nice attitude, I think. And I just had an appetite and a joy for just learning. But then it became very clear during that experience that if we are thinking about who we are as a department and what our values are and thinking about where we want to go, diversity and inclusion became a really signature part of our definition at Emory. And we published our first paper in 2001 in Leon Haley and I about a model program, knowing that we needed to invite a diverse set of learners into our environment. And then over time, I can tell you, when I landed in the position as an ARD, Philip Shane and I really thought about what we wanted to create. And with equity and inclusion being a part of that narrative, the education piece around that also became interwoven in that. And we were very clear about ensuring we started to build some of our programming and some of our educational initiatives inclusive of those narratives. So looking at disparities and going on neighborhood tours and trying to create something that was not quite embedded in what we're doing as educators. And it became somewhat iterative, and it became normative, and it became part of our DNA and for what we became known for as a department. And as we grew and developed and looked at how we can not just be representative of EM, how we would engender that sort of appetite around that particular topic across the school, across CORD, where we published a lot with our program directors on the value of diversity and inclusion and educating us all now that it's a thing. You know, who knew back then that it would become a thing? I mean, I was like, oh my God, my dance card is full. But it really became, you know, organic and clearly obvious that that was something we wanted to do. And then as I grew up in the world, I was fortuitous enough to then bridge the lens towards UME and became an assistant dean. And in that role, I was able to get a clear sense, and that was in 2007, of threading across UME and GME and how this works in the education milieu with a very self-serving attitude of recruiting as many people to emergency medicine, even though I'm supposed to be a nonpartisan dean, not, sorry. There were a lot of people I used my influence as an assistant dean to engage in EM. So I didn't take on a specific sort of educational either course or additional training. It was somewhat organic, but my ability to transcend UME and GME to where I am today really became the lifeline routed in the subject matter of diversity and inclusion, for which we published and engaged across the national platform.
Great stories. You know, Dr. Gisondi had mentioned that, you know, there was one area that you thought you needed more experience with or more training in was perhaps educational research. You know, for the other panelists, do you have a skill set that you wished you had gotten somewhere else or have become so integral to your current position, but you either had to learn it along the way or, you know, what should people be investing in and thinking about now to get to the point where you might be at?
So I'll jump in here because I am further along. So I'm not as much in the educational realm, more so administratively, but I've learned very clearly that that is an area as we grow and develop, and as we have grown and developed in emergency medicine, that has to be a part of the narrative. You know, we now have a new, you know, journal on education and training. We now have a lot of opportunities in which our faculty and our junior faculty and our residents can engage. We now have educational fellowships that exist, which didn't exist when I was coming up, and we were kind of doing it on the fly and thinking what would make sense and how would it work, because as you know, education wasn't as valued, right? I mean, the metric is around, you know, seeing patients quickly, doing things quickly, and the educational appetite was just not there, frankly. So now that it is becoming much more a part of the DNA for certainly promotion, I would argue that if educational research and really asking questions that can help redefine perhaps how we teach medical education, whether it's UME or GME, we're clearly at that bubble to make sure that that happens. And as I mentor up-and-coming individuals who talk with me about, oh, I want to do educational research, well, now that there are resources and other things that you can get involved with and also mentor across, I would absolutely encourage them to do that.
I had the opportunity during my fellowship with a significant amount of protected time to really acquire a lot of formal training in education methods, educational administration, and education research. And I obtained a master's of clinical research working in conjunction with a school of education and really kind of just soaked up everything I could at that time. That was very valuable, but I have found since then that that process is ongoing, and I don't think a dedicated fellowship right after residency is at all the only way to do it. I'm going to flip the question a little bit and talk about the training that I didn't get that I wish I had, and I see now what would have been the value, and that is really early leadership training in terms of the business of medicine, negotiation, leadership styles. My experience has been that that training is suggested to people earlier on who are outside of the education realm than it is to educators, and it is vitally important to be an education leader that you are able to navigate that world. So that is a realm that I've been exploring more on my own recently, and would certainly advise people who are kind of up and coming in their career to get started early in becoming facile in this world, even if it's not something that you kind of see yourself being interested in. It is crucial for you to be effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do continue to develop new competencies along the way. I would say, leadership competencies are undervalued and really hard to practice, frankly, when you're a junior faculty member. Perhaps you get the assistant residency director role, or you get an opportunity at a professional organization, professional society early on. But most of the time, you have to kind of be in the PD role to start to have those opportunities. And leadership training courses are often mid-career faculty experiences. So I think that would be one. I think learning to be a mentor is a very difficult set of competencies to learn through trial and error, frankly, and through success stories and through those that you wish you had done differently. And then I think probably the last one is, who would have predicted when we were coming up the impact of social media, right? So, I went to the Dallas SAEM to a 4 o'clock-ish panel that Michelle Lynn had run on, called From Twitter to Tenure. And I remember going to it thinking, I really would like tenure, so I will join Twitter. And I had not done any social media until 2014, the 2014 SAM. And how career changing was like the coffee I had with her afterwards, where we pitched ideas back and forth, and I really started to get involved with academic life and emergency medicine. Tons of invites to speak, tons of collaborations and great friendships made really across a digital platform. None of us would have predicted that. So, what is the next competency? Is it educational dashboards and learning analytics and predictive analytics? And are we going to need to have an IT competency that perhaps none of the educators in the room necessarily thought they were going to have or need to have when they were coming up through training? It's hard to predict, right? But I think keeping yourself open-minded and working in team science so that you can start to partner with people that have different skill sets and you can develop the ones that you don't have, I think are really important to our own development.
It's interesting because last year, as I was thinking about this talk, WestJam published a paper that I was privileged to be a part of. Dan Martin was the primary author, Sally Stanton was the senior author, and it was on creating a vision for education leadership. So it's a great segue to what you're talking about, and it was really looking at what is your vision, what is your mission, and what are your core values. And it was hard because in this group of us, we were talking about this, and they're like, well, tell us what your vision is around educational leadership. And we're like, very, very, very smart people, and well, what's your mission, what's your vision? And then what we did was flip it and then ask people, well, what do you know about Cheryl? And if you think you know about Cheryl, what would you say? And then how would you do it? And I will just read for you and say that I actually had to write down and figure out what it was. And then in the publication, I said, well, if you know me, my vision is really about quality care, inclusive of people from all walks of life, regardless of where they come from. My mission is around advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. But this was through engagement with new key organizational structures, such as SAEM, ADIM, ASEP, and the like. And my core values are around professional and personal connections, which in putting this on paper, and I've actually brought this to some of our seniors and having them think about it, and they said, Cheryl, we hadn't really thought about it. We're getting ready to graduate, some of whom were thinking about going into academia. This was a framework that I learned in my late life. I mean, we published this last year, which really then anchored me and helped me think through and think about, what would I be doing now in my educational domain. And in hearing other people's stories and having them struggle with and wrestle with what that looks like, right, their vision, missions, and core values, was a real aha moment for us to say, oh, wow, okay, we kind of think we know what it's about, but here it is, and now how do we do the things that would help influence and enforce that?
Excellent. Well, you, Dr. Herron, specifically mentioned as someone who has cared a lot about and done so much for the field to move diversity and inclusion forward as an issue, the importance of mentorship. Yeah. How have mentors shaped your career, and how have you learned to mentor the next generation to sort of carry the banner on?
Great question. So literally, I just left our ADIM meeting and talked about mentorship, amplifying what Ian said this morning about that and what the data states. It's clear around that. mentorship and sponsorship are extremely important. And, you know, thinking about my journey and the mentors I've had, including Arthur Kellerman and Kate Halpern and others who allowed me to think creatively about the work and not stifle my sort of passion around this is critical. And, you know, as a woman of color in medicine and in ADIM, we talked about the realities of isolation and how that can dampen one's ability to just be rock stars if you are continuously feeling either alone or unable to move the needle in one way, shape, or form. And so having a mentor who happened to be a white guy, straight, you know, which, you know, is essential, and that's the ally piece of the conversation. And then now also compelling me to mentor going forward is what makes us all better. And I would argue that while we are in the noise of the world of all of this negativity, that is the sort of kernel and holy grail that we can't lose sight of on how to give people hope in academia and in medicine, frankly, when we know the data around physician suicide and wellness. We must take this seriously, and we must find ways to speak to, across the 5 generations of physicians, how we can keep us all whole. And mentoring is not or lack of mentoring is not an option, or sponsorship for that matter.
I forgot the specific question. What was the specific
Mentoring.
question? It was so good. I mean, it's mentoring, but
Right,
what was the actual question, man? No.
We're just going to
Let's
let
move
Dr.
on,
Herron
man.
just
What
drop
am
the
I
mic,
supposed to
walk
say?
away. We can keep. Yeah, there. Oh,
The guy in the back of the room's not happy you did that. You know that, right?
we'll put it on SAM.
Put it on the bill. Yeah, that goes to the ADM session. Yeah, that's their budget.
I mean, it just essentially was.
Sorry, we laugh a lot at the end.
Yeah.
How I'm going to drop one too. How have mentors shaped your career, and how have they sort of changed?
All right. Yeah. She listed her very impressive list of Arthur and Philip and Kate, and you know, Jamie Collins was the program director who hired me, and she taught me to be a pragmatist and really to go around a lot of the administrative nonsense and just get things done, which was really helpful. And Jim Adams gave me a great appreciation of admin and business and operations and how they go hand in hand with education. If you really want to make the best residents, you have to teach them how to be operationally savvy and be the best billers and have the best QI marks and patient safety marks and all of the things that perhaps aren't necessarily, you know, what's the right drug for this disease at the right time. I mean, you know, things that really make people a little bit bigger than just a new grad. And you know, I'm very grateful to both of them, and I find myself thinking about how to mentor my fellows and mentor my residents and junior faculty that I'm hiring. And you know, I recognize there's a responsibility, right, that you owe people, and I think the sponsorship comment is one that should not be overlooked amongst a very large and impressive answer there. I think we have to sponsor people, and we have to, you know, put ourselves out there to do so. Because folks just don't get opportunities unless you give them to them. And you know, how you interact with and set expectations for your mentees and drive them through their career is a real social and relational endeavor. And you know, now crosses generations in ways that are challenging to me. You know, there's a lot of new grads coming out who perhaps have different values about work and the time they work and when they work, and doesn't mean they don't work as hard or that they don't want excellence. It's just perhaps differently defined than what I had when I came out. So that's a challenge that I have to learn about as well.
There have been so many good things already said. When I think of mentorship and sponsorship, I just feel grateful for the receiving end that I've been on with both of those. And I feel you know, particularly in terms of mentorship, I think of my first chair, Jairus Hedges, who gave me not only the opportunity to do something that really didn't exist at the time, but demonstrated to me a leader who would always make the right decision based on principle and who really had his faculty's back. And I think that experience of being brand new faculty under such a visionary and inspirational chair, kind of set in me like, this is what I want to be. I want to be a leader who can always feel like the story I'm telling and what I'm portraying actually resonates with what I feel is right on the inside. And that was it was a brief time that he was chair and I was still there, but it was really, I think back about him all the time. And so I have so many people who I could tell similar stories to, but I think of the most inspirational mentors to me in that light of the ones who have really kind of taught me the lessons that have helped me the most. Sponsorship has been invaluable. I have had feedback over and over throughout the years that you need to sell yourself more. You need to be more explicit about your strengths. And that is something that I think certain personalities, and there are some gender issues too, may struggle with in academia. And the way that I overcame those things early on was I had somebody, and for me it was Pat Burnett, who was my mentor, who would sit at a table and say, Lanie Yarris is the person who should do this. I believe in her and she's going to get the job done, when I actually didn't even know that I could do the job at that time. And so I feel like that was really powerful for me, and I try to do that for other people. And then in terms of mentorship, I just think it kind of relates to core values for me. I've realized that the thing that keeps me going in life in general is connection to other people and relationships. And medicine for me is an expression of that. Teaching is an expression of that, and mentorship is an expression of that. And I can't always show up the way that I want to, but the reason I engage in that is because that's actually what matters the most to me in life, is that way of connecting, and mentorship is a great opportunity to do it. So I think of it more in terms of figuring it out, kind of what's important to you and what keeps you going, and then find the ways that you can express that throughout your career and the actual jobs you do day to day.
Great. That's, you know, Dr. Yarris, you reflected on the fact that it sounds like you have a little bit of imposterism, or a streak of it at least. I think that's very common in the world of education. A lot of educators don't feel like they can always articulate the value that they bring, or that how much they do for the department. Could any of you all, or maybe starting with you, reflect on how you've been able to either overcome or cope, or just deal with that particular piece that I think challenges many people in education?
Yeah. So to be totally honest about this, because this is a topic I talk about with my residents a lot, I don't actually feel like I have imposter syndrome. I feel like many people in medicine suffer from it. I think I have a healthy sense of self-confidence, but I think what I actually have is a very accurate assessment of my limitations. And when I have limitations, I have a difficult time pretending like they're not there. I'm very transparent about those limitations. And so in times that's held me back, because I've realized this is a big job and I actually might not be ready to do it yet. So I think it's more an accurate sense of my own limitations, which not everybody struggles with. And I think that we all are on a spectrum in terms of our confidence and our ability to self-assess. And especially in terms of education and working with learners, like figuring out where they are and how that fits with their personality style and their roles. Is this person actually underconfident, or are they an accurate self-assessor? Is this person overconfident, or do they have a good self-confidence and they're actually superstars? And trying to figure out how to align how they see themselves with how you see them, and then work together to get them to the next level, I think is the kind of the way I conceptualize and approach imposter syndrome now. But thank you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, part of your question was on the return on investment for education, right? And I think this is a really important topic for all of us to grapple with at an individual level in your individual shop, right? So you have consumers of what you decide will be your marketable product, right? If your education program is a product, if your graduates are products, right? Your consumers are a whole host of different folks, but they certainly are folks above you as well. Your chair needs to understand the product that you're putting out and why to invest in it. And you know, I really am so grateful for Jim Adams at Northwestern, who helped me understand if you train them the right way and they don't cause a problem, that saves us so much money down the road, right? And so the things that you need to have a great program to be able to do the right thing so that there are no problems, there are no complaints, and we can have simple meetings without a lot of nonsense and, you know, and problems and challenges, you know, that pays dividends down the road. We can do things with the money that we would otherwise spend to figure out those problems, and the opportunity cost and the hours can be spent doing research in other areas. I think when you start to to deliver your ROI in those frameworks, right? For your chair, I think you start to say, well, I deserve this part of the pie. I deserve this part of the budget because I'm going to make sure that there are no other problems and our researchers can do research and they don't have to be bothered with students and residents who need to be remediated and students and residents who are going to cause us problems. And you get rid of the weekly headache and the weekly, crisis, and all that stuff goes away. I think you have to be able to demonstrate it, and you have to be able to put metrics and numbers around it so that people can understand it, because you have to speak their language for them to understand you.
It's this whole educational spectrum is fascinating to me. Now that I'm in the bottom of the fourth quarter, I can say that, in the spirit of the finals of basketball. I am quite confident I will not be doing this another 22 years. And what I've learned over the time, even for myself, is the value of being nimble and being flexible, right? Tolerance for uncertainty in how information is delivered, i.e. social media and how it's happening now. If we as educators aren't open to and mindful of these different changes and being okay with that. So I like what you said about, well, like I said, I don't know how to Twitter worth a damn. Here, can you do that, please? Thank you. And I'm fine with that. And it's not a matter of imposter. It's just I just haven't learned a new modality, and I'm okay with that. And so when we are teaching students and residents who 22 years from now, they may be teaching in a whole different domain of educational delivery, that they're going to have to be clear that the flexibility and being nimble and fluid around what this could or would look like with IT and everything else has to be the cornerstone for how they're going to not only perhaps do it well, but enjoy what they're doing, because historically, medicine was very rigid, right? I mean, it was this way, one way by these folks, and if you didn't conform and or acquiesce to that, you'd go be put in a corner or something, right? Medicine is no longer like this anymore, right? You have to be clear that we're having multiple people from different domains and different levels, and we can talk about, as we know, competency-based learning and what that looks like, whether medical education should be down to 3 years, which some programs are doing. I mean, there's so many different facets here. And as educators, we have to be up on all of these things and collect the data and measure it, along the way ensuring that everyone is kept whole, the educators and the learners, so that medicine remains enjoyable for what it is, which is a privilege and an honor to do. So along the way, as we all grow and learn, I think that needs to be a part of the narrative.
Oh, yes, please. Question? Yeah, please. Yes, please, by all means.
Yes, this isn't a monologue.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to follow up on something Cheryl said, which is, I don't think you're at the bottom of the fourth quarter, by the way.
Oh, come on. I got to retire. Come on now. I'm trying to pass that.
You bring up something interesting, right? That emergency medicine is now a mature specialty. And many of us have kind of risen to the top of what would have been like the top level position in our relative domains and our departments, et cetera, 20 years ago. But it's not anymore, right? Because there's now kind of more of a focus on 5-year terms and thinking about what the next big thing is going to be. And I was just curious if each of you might share some ideas about, that's a fire that I'm not going to put out right now.
Fair enough.
I'm not doing it right now.
Okay.
I just said that. If you could talk about kind of how you're planning for your next big thing.
So the question is, what are we going to do next, right? And how do you plan for the next big thing? It's an interesting conversation. Over the last day and a half, I've actually been thinking about, not just the last day and a half, but I'm coming up with this new thing called SMAR, right? And I don't know what it stands for yet, but it's the opposite of RAMS, right? R-A-M-S, I'm going SMAR, right? So from RAMS to SMAR, right? Because we've now developed and engaged and created a very robust, vibrant group of people who are coming into the specialty, and we are now aging enough in the profession, right? 50 years, whatever number you want to use, where we're having now a critical mass of people who are like, okay, what's next? What are we going to do? And I'm not sure where the SMAR, I'm a SMAR, right? I'm not sure what that's going to look like, and have we created and we had this conversation at the AWEM lunch, have we created and looked at, and I know AWEM looked a little bit at women in various stages of their career, but have we been intentional around looking at those sorts of things where we are historically, right? So the 5 generations, there's a generation above us who they worked their behinds off. They didn't know what it was like. There were no duty hours. And then they retire and they fall off the cliff, right? Because now their total identity has been erased because that's all they knew was medicine, right? So how do we stair step in a way that keeps us valued and feel valued, right? And I've heard colleagues say to me, well, I'm just useless. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I'm a seasoned veteran. I don't know about you. I'm a seasoned veteran. I'm not useless, right? But how do we create and build in those next steps, which means you have to be thinking outside of the box and be nimble and look and see where your value added is. No one can take from me my 22 years of experience. I'm quite confident that that means and will always mean something, right? Because the residents say I have spidey sense. They're like, how the hell did you know that? And the books that I said, I know, it's called, it's called experience, right? So how do you parlay those realities with that? So what I'm trying to do in creating my next steps are looking at my vision, mission, core values, right? And falling back on that and saying, how will this then align with who I am as a person? And I've done multiple leadership things and strength analysis, and I'm a multiplier, right? So knowing who you are and what your values are imperative. So in my multiplying phase, I am now looking at how to transcend and use my expertise to help others multiply. And I'm good with that. What that is going to look like in a new job or a new position, I'm unclear. I'm, exploring. I have an executive coach, and I, look at ways that I can build up my own knowledge base and what that might look like, and being open to knowing that myopically focused in just being an EM doc, which we know is far from the truth when you have organizations like Feminam and people doing advocacy and people doing all these other things with the skills and the talents that they've attained doing emergency medicine, gets me excited about what could be next in my life. And it could be I just go hang out on the beach in Jamaica. I'm good with that too. So I am okay with my journey. And the journey is both personal and professional. And I have created, like I've gone to my emeritus college and looked at, what's happening there. When I ask my colleagues, so who's your HR person? They don't know them. I'm like, well, when are you able to retire? They don't know that. I'm like, well, how are you preparing to And I go to these meetings, and my husband and I literally are like the youngest people in the room, and people are like, what's happening? And so we're just here to get information, and think about the future, so that the sticker shock of feeling that you're going to be egressing out of something that's been a part of my DNA for 20 odd years is not going to be horrible. It's actually going to be lovely. So y'all can come to the retirement party in Jamaica.
All right, so seniors in medicine aging robustly. No? Is that good? That's my first pass. You talked for a while. I was going through a whole series of acronyms. Just write that down. All right, write that down.
Write that down. I will absolutely give you credit if that's
Yeah, thanks. Good. So, I mean, Sarah, you can just walk down the hallway. We can chat about it. But I think about like professional identity changing for me over the course of my career, right? And now I describe myself as a medical education researcher. I didn't do that before, but I do now. And I think about times in my career when I was joyful and I was in flow and happy, and I think there are times where I wasn't. And I wasn't unhappy at the end of my PD run, but I was close. And I think if I had done another year or two, I think I really would have started to get a bit bitter and start to forget about the things that used to be really important that, if I make them less important, then, maybe that's not right? It's not that they're less important, it's that I find them less important. So there's a time and a space to make a transition to the next big thing. I think what you're speaking to, though, is that the rules of the game have changed, right? The rules of the game that we thought that we were going to follow 20 years ago are not the rules of the game anymore. And you got to make up your own rules. I mean, I think that's what young people coming up are teaching us, right? And I think that's what Dara and Feminam and all these folks are teaching you. What is the thing that brings you joy? Go after the thing that brings you joy. Emergency physicians should know, life is way too short to do things that don't make you happy. So when the happiness factor is gone, then you just got to recreate what is happy for you. That's probably the lesson I took away in this most recent transition for me.
We've learned an incredible amount of skill sets as EM physicians, right? I mean, we've learned how to do things quickly. We've learned how to change quickly. We've learned how to adapt quickly. I mean, that's just part of the unintended reality. I mean, I go home and people are like, okay, Cheryl can do that. Goes, yeah, I can, right? I mean, because I can, think quickly, I can act quickly, I can do quickly, I can change quickly, and that is those skill sets are incredibly valuable as you age and you go through the life journey, because that's something that we've learned along the way in addition to the knowledge base in being emergency medicine. And that's why if you look at it, and that's something I wanted to study, is how many deans and DIOs are EM physicians, right? Because we get it done. I mean, and they're like, okay, we're going to get them because they get it done. And that's our DNA and our skill sets. And it's something we should be proud of. And you transcend those realities into fill in the blank of what you want to do. And the world is yours.
So I'm going to go hang out on the beach in Jamaica with Cheryl, and then I'm just going to hang out with Mike because that makes me happy.
That's right.
When I think about what I'm going to do next, I fall back on my core values and my idea of I want to spend every minute in my day trying to get as close as I can to the things that really matter to me. And so, I mentioned my core value. The thing that really gets me going is having meaningful interactions and connections with other people. And right now, for me, my department's in a transition. It's a time of transformation. And what means a lot to me is being there for my residents and helping all of these learners who've invested in our program through a difficult transition. And when I think about what's next, I think about so many different opportunities, but specifically like what's gonna arise that will allow me to both have meaningful interactions with people and then maybe focus on my passion in emergency medicine education, which my passion has been thinking about professional development in education, research, and scholarship, and how to foster that as a community and how to support individuals, but really support our specialty. And I think I'm open to seeing what opportunities exist. I don't know if it would be a different editor position, editor-in-chief, or working for a national organization, or working at my own shop, or doing something kind of in the virtual space. But I will definitely look for an opportunity that allows me to capitalize on those things that mean the most to me.
And we'll hang out.
You will hang out. Yeah. Join us on the beach.
I want to make sure, are there any other questions from the audience? I've got one last one, and maybe we'll sort of end there. There's been a lot of discussion in the field about wellness and the challenges that face us as a specialty for a variety of reasons, leading to burnout. You three have sat here for about an hour and smiled and dropped mics and are clearly people who have been resilient in what can be a challenging field for a multitude of reasons. And you've defined your career, I would say, in perhaps the most difficult pathway of all, through education, as opposed to places that you can easily demonstrate ROI through grant money and things like that. What about, whether it be you or what have you done to ensure your resilience over the course of these last 2+ decades, maybe, or less?
So I don't know if that's easy or just a realistic thing for me. So, we started our wellness committee in EM at Emory in 2004, and it went something like this. Cheryl, what are you smoking? Because you're always happy and stuff. We're going to chair this wellness committee, which there was anything about that, and you need to help us. And I then reflected on, why, right? And I have, I guess, throughout my entire life had just some fundamental anchors, my faith in my family, embedded in which, were just some realities for me, just identifying who I am. Now, I don't know if that's just DNA or just fill in the blank, but I've always been very clear. And they, people who come, and residents in particular, the first thing I would ask them is, what are the 6 things that keep you well? That was how our interviews started, long before this wellness thing. And they're like, what are you talking about? Why are you asking me these things? Because I have fundamentally always believed that if we're not caring for ourselves, then we won't be able to do the work. So in asking those questions and demonstrating that on our recruitment slides and visually, it made me always remind myself that I got to practice what I preach, right? So I used to say, well, what are the 6 things that keep you well? And I would get this blank stare. And then I would tell them mine, and then I would ask them theirs, and they'd then tell me mine. And I said, that's really not fair. You need to come up with your own. And mine are my faith, my family, my Merlot in my tub, my chocolate, my 6 vacations a year, my exercise, and a good book. You see how that went? So that is like so in my DNA, and that's what I tell everyone. And so it ends up I get lots of chocolate and beverages for Christmas. I, go on my vacations, and I have given myself, I call the Cheryl P's, which starts, embedded in that is permission to do whatever I feel I need, because if I don't give myself permission, no one else will, right? It's fascinating, right? So, it's around my passion, my purpose, and what am I here for, right? So passion and purpose and the privilege of all of that. And if I need to pause, I pause. If I need to check my pulse, I do it. If I need to pivot, I do it. If I need to get some new partnerships, I do it. And I give myself permission. And I'm very confident about that. And and I'm not a slacker. One would argue that I kind of get things done. So it works. And that's how I've been able to, over my life, own my own life. Can't read the crystal ball, can't predict the future, but I can own my life. And no one else can do that for me. And that's how I've lived my life. And that's how over the years, even through, and I've had my days, I've had my moments, and that's checking the pulse when I know I got to take one of them vacations, so that I can come back with my tank filled to be able to give my best self.
So good. How do I follow that? All right. That's good. It's good. You had 7 things, by the way. I counted your 6 things or 7. Yeah, it's all right. I would say two. Oh, they go together. Oh, all right. Got it. I'm envisioning it now. That's all right. That's on video too. I would say this. There are 2 different ways I'd answer that question. I think the first way is expertise drives personal integrity and value for yourself. And I think if we're talking about medical education, are we the stepchildren of this meeting? Are we the stepchildren of academic medicine? Or do we develop expertise within medical education as its own domain, and we're scholarship experts, and then we all of a sudden realize, gosh, I have a lot of value. And in fact, I know more about this topic than others in my department do, and therefore I am an expert and I can craft the future that I want to craft for myself, just as the infectious disease expert or the PE expert or the heart failure expert can with crafting their career. So I think that's one part. The other part I think is the overused but really underappreciated professional board of directors. You get a therapist, you have your professional friends and your family and your people you can call on, and then you start to label times when you are burnt out and you recognize it and you pull back from it, right? I've been burnt out numerous times in my career for various reasons, and they all sort of feel like when you all studied for step 1, right? Like that's what they feel like, and I could see the end of the tunnel most of the time, but I have to get better about always recognizing there is an end of the tunnel, or I have to make the end, because now I am an expert and I have value and I can call the shots to a certain degree in my career.
So I think for me, there's 3 things. And I think the first one is that I've learned there's this little voice inside my mind that starts to whisper to me when I'm on the wrong track. And learning how to hear that voice and believe it and have the courage to act based on what it's telling me is what allows me to be resilient. I could be in the middle of a shitstorm, but if I'm listening to that voice, I can withstand it. And I could be on the beach, and if I'm not listening to that voice, I could be in a bad place. And so learning how to kind of find that and listen to that is the first one. I think the second and the third come from my spiritual practice. And the second really has to do with the idea of being okay with how I really am and allowing myself to feel it and not judging it, because sometimes we hear that voice but we still judge it, and that just harms us. And the third is a mantra that I kind of hear in my head a lot of times when I'm dealing with difficult things, and it's basically, where we place our attention is what drives our experience. And we actually have so much more control than we think we do when we're dealing with difficult situations. And we have the power to create how we respond to things. And so I've reminded myself of that when I'm placing my attentions on the wrong things and it's making me feel really bad. And when I can place my attention on the things that I really am grateful for that bring me joy, then I just naturally feel more resilient.
Yeah, it's time. First and foremost, I want to thank our panelists because I don't know about the rest of you all. This has been the best SAEM session I've been to in the decade I've been coming to SAEM. So I really appreciate the insights that you all provided. They were just phenomenal. I'm inspired to go out and be a better educator, be a better academician because of the things you said. What I heard you say, I think there were 4 points that I'm going to take home with myself. I don't know if the audience feels the same way, but I heard to craft a vision and write it down and reference it often. I heard the power of sponsorship that as throughout my career will continue to help me grow, which is essentially the important thing to keep me happy. That only through expertise are we going to show the ROI that we as educators really provide to the sort of next generation of academics. And then last but not least, what defines emergency medicine as the best specialty for both education and just life in general is to be nimble. And we are that, and we will continue to be that. So I appreciate all of your insights, and thank you today.
Thank you for this.